Okay, chapter 23, the second part of the Progressive Era. Just some facts about the time period. At this point, life expectancy was 47. 14% of people had a bathtub. 8% of the phones had a telephone. Maximum speed limit was 10 miles an hour. And some of the smaller states that we think of now were more heavily populated than California. Wages were 22 cents an hour. Most people were not making enough to live on, between $200 and $400 per year. I'm going to skip through some of these. You can read them if you want to go through them. And as we get into the Progressive Era, or farther into it, and just more characteristics in defining it, it can be defined by a concern about the effects of industrialization and industrial life, fundamental optimism of human nature and progress, willingness to intervene in people's lives, so very opposite of social Darwinism there, and a willingness to use government power to enforce that change, meaning programs or the help of the president or Congress. And then religious zeal and reliance on social and natural science. Oops, I think I skipped one. No, okay. Several different characteristics of those different concerns and goals of the Progressive Era. A lot of shared values, a sense of evangelical Protestant duty there. Duty was to purge the world of sins, prostitution, drunkenness, faith in the belief of science, viewing the environment as key to reform. If they can change the environment, they can change the individual, and commitment to improving all aspects of American life, whether that was unsafe factory conditions, child labor, lack of government response, and then all the different goals, believing in a better world and the ability to achieve it, seeking a cure for the problems in the cities, nations, state, fundamental optimism, all of that played a factor. Professions were becoming more professional. If you remember a few units back, we talked about how they had tried to democratize, not make different professions so elitist by taking away certification requirements. Well, now those are coming back. So things like the Bar Association, examining boards, American Medical Association, teacher certificates, education laws, all of that to strengthen these professions by requiring entrance exams and certifications. The social justice movement, social welfare, urban life was improved mostly by reformers, but also by settlement house workers, other committed volunteers. Jane Addams, Francis Kelly, other leaders of the social justice movement felt they needed political support at the state legislature for meeting the needs of immigrants and the working class. So they lobbied for better schools, juvenile courts, liberalized divorce laws, safety regulations for tenements and factories. And they really go on trying to help a lot of the social problems, more interested in social cures than individual charity, trying to seek an end to the actual problem itself, not just help people up on a case-by-case basis. They would apply scientific methods to their reform, photographs, maps of the slums, statistical tables and charts, analyzing the poor, making surveys, and having conferences devoted to reforms like minimum wage, maximum hours, workman's comp, and widows' pensions. The 18th Amendment was part of that crusade to better society, purity crusade against alcohol and drunkenness. The WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, hit 250,000 members and heads up this crusade, largest women's organization at that time. One of the people that they remember quite fondly is Miss Carrie Nation. She was a 6-foot woman who carried a hatchet around and went into bars and broke up all the barrels of alcohol. They did eventually accomplish the amendment. Had 19 states prohibit alcohol prior to the 18th Amendment. The 18th Amendment prohibits alcohol, the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquor. If it's hard for you to remember which amendment was which, the only one I really have a clue for is this one. And then the only way I remember it is the 18th Amendment, 18 you can't drink, 21 you can. So 18th Amendment got rid of alcohol, 21st brought it back. Hope that helps. 19th Amendment, women were filling the progressive ranks, working for social work, meeting for coffee and talking about conditions, and they start to get more involved, especially towards women's suffrage. Forming organizations, women in the social justice movement needed to reach elected officials, believing in an organization, people lobbying. The president of this association was Carrie Tubman Catt, Anna Howard Shaw, and changed the approach that their sensitivity to moral issues would help better society, temperance, clean government reforms. And during this time period where that's the big focus right now is making society better, it was actually a very good argument. 1920, the 19th Amendment is passed, giving right to vote not denied on account of gender. Suffrage was seen as empowering. and would benefit the disadvantaged. We've gone over a lot about labor, so if you want to look over those, go ahead. With Republicans and the change in government, just some background real quick before we go on, because I know a lot of this was in your homework, but I want to make sure you get it. Right now, the idea with government is it's changing, progressive pragmatist, measuring the value of ideas and actions, rejecting social Darwinism. John Dewey, really involved in education, focusing on personal growth, free inquiry, creativity, opposing memorization, and really making sure that people focus on children's needs and capabilities. Socialist Party was being formed. Eugene V. Debs was a reformist political philosophy, followers of Karl Marx, urging workers to join a worldwide revolution to overthrow capitalism, uniting intellectuals, factory workers, tenant farmers, miners, lumberjacks, promising reform rather than the overthrow of capitalism per se. Reforming in the cities and states, progressives were taking control of city halls, solving social problems, reforming the government for efficiency and effectiveness, new agencies, government powers extended at all levels, local, state, and federal. Interest groups were growing. They have the decline in voter population, less people being involved in voting and in politics, so interest groups were trying to get things they wanted, working to pressure the government. Reform in the cities, professional and non-political civil service reform, civil engineers for utility and water systems, physicians and nurses, planners for highway development, appointed commissioners instead of elected officials, widening the gap between the voters and decisions, but it does improve efficiency, which was the ultimate goal. They started to have a city manager, and reform mayors like Tom Johnson in Cleveland, the Golden Rule Jones, Samuel Jones, free kindergarten, playgrounds, night school, made ownership of utilities public for water, gas, electric, and transportation. State regulatory commissions were created, some different things to help make government more towards the people. Initiative, where voters actually get to propose new laws. Referendum, to accept and reject laws at the ballot box. Recall, where you remove an elected official. The 17th Amendment, allowing for direct election of senators. Most states had direct primaries, allowing people to choose their candidates over the nominating convention. Some of the other reform governors, Robert La Follette of Wisconsin, most famous reform governor in Wisconsin, takes on for higher education and sweeping reforms. Teddy Roosevelt really likes what he was doing, supplied him with facts and figures to support the measures he wanted. More on efficiency in Oregon, Louis Brandeis issued the Brandeis Brief, costs to society and individual when they work excessive hours, so scientific data to prove his point, and becomes another model of reform. Okay, so moving on to Roosevelt. Sorry, a lot of that was not in your notes. It was in the homework, but I want to make sure you had it. Roosevelt comes in. He follows McKinley's assassination in 1901, went to the White House at age 42, youngest president in U.S. history. He's very unusual, believed the president should not do more, or should do much more than just lead the executive departments. That was the president's job to set the legislative agenda, to get more involved. He surrounds himself with able associates and brings a lot of enthusiasm to the presidency. Very aggressive, very high-spirited, opinionated, often not looked on very well by some of the other members of Washington. He comes in to bust the trust, known as the trust-busting president, even though he only broke up 25, and Taft, who came in later, broke up 43. Starts with the Northern Security Companies. Trusts he believed were hurtful to general welfare and in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. He is the first president since that law came into effect to actually enforce the law. He dissolves Northern Security Company and goes on to break up 25 more. He believed that there were good trusts and bad trusts, so he did leave some of them intact, and those were some of the ones that Taft goes after later, which is one of the reasons why they didn't get along very well. The Square Deal had to do with the United Mine Workers. They wanted better wages and an 8-hour workday and recognition of their union, and so 140,000 miners walk off the job, creating a fuel shortage or coal shortage in schools, hospitals, and factories. So because it affects the overall economy, the president's going to get involved. President usually sided with the business and labor conflicts. Hayes with the railroad strike in 1877, Cleveland with the Pullman strike in 1894, both of them sending in troops to stop the strikers. Teddy Roosevelt works as a broker of interest. He wants to favor neither side, just wants a square deal for both, equal on all sides. He was honest and impartial. When the mine workers were being too stubborn, made him a little angry, he threatens to take over the mines and kick them out. They finally concede to a 10% wage increase and 9-hour workdays. Regulation for the railroad. The Elkins Act prohibited railroad rates, strengthened the ICC, gave the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, the power to set the rates and prevent practices that were unfair, took the initiative in persuading a Republican majority in Congress to pass these two laws to strengthen the ICC. The other one was the Hepburn Act, to be able to fix reasonable maximum rates, to fix quote-unquote just and reasonable rates. Jurisdiction of the ICC was broadened with that law, and so they'd be able to fix rates and give more power to Congress. Upton Sinclair's book led to two more laws. A federal investigation of meatpacking industry led to people discovering the horrifying detail of Chicago stockyards and meatpacking industry, and so it led to the Meat Inspection Act for sanitary rules, government inspection, to at least meet minimum requirements. Pure Food and Drug Act requiring them to list certain ingredients may contain alcohol, drugs, diluted fraud, bans the manufacture of unsanitary food and drugs, and made sure they, if they were mislabeled, there would be consequences. Some excerpts from The Jungle if you want to read those. All right, conserving the land. Teddy Roosevelt was a lover of the wilderness and outdoor life. First comprehensive national conservation policy. Gifford Pinchot, his chief of the Forest Service, works with it, defines conservation as a wide use of natural resources and quadruples the acreage under federal protection. 1901, there's about 45 million acres under federal protection. By the time he leaves office, 195 in government preserves. A couple of laws: the Forest Reserve Act, 1891, setting aside land to not be sold or developed. Newlands Reclamation Act, 1902, providing money for the sale of public land for irrigation projects, and established the National Conservation Commission under Gifford Pinchot. When he's done as president, he will step down after 2 terms, refuses re-election, and picks Taft to be his successor because he promised to continue with all of his progressive reforms. Taft was a pretty good administrator. He had experience with the Taft Commission in the Philippines, but he wasn't a very good president. Formed civil government in the Philippines, doesn't like politics or the limelight, really wasn't even all that excited about being president. Taft will continue Roosevelt's progressive policies, almost doubles the antitrust cases, among them U.S. Steel, included a merger approved by Roosevelt, which angers Roosevelt later on and sees as an attack on his integrity. 1908, Taft wins. He begins to separate himself from the progressive Republicans and becomes more conservative. Progressives wanted high tariffs to favor trust. Conservatives wanted high tariffs to witness. I have that backwards. Progressives thought high tariffs favored trust, and so they wanted the tariffs defeated. Conservatives thought it protected business and wanted to raise the rates. The Payne-Aldrich Act breaks up the progressives on that very issue because it raises the rates, the tariff rates on most imports, and Taft had promised to keep tariff rates down, and so he pretty much does the opposite. The Ballinger-Pinchot affair, progressives like Pinchot, who Roosevelt had hired. They distrust Ballinger, Secretary of the Interior. Pinchot accuses Ballinger of selling public lands to friends, opening up Alaska to private development. Taft tells Pinchot to drop the issue. He won't, writes up against Ballinger, and so Taft fires Pinchot for insubordination and lost a lot of the support of the Republicans who liked Pinchot, a lot of the progressive Republicans. The Mann-Elkins Act to strengthen the ICC, empowering the ICC to fix railroad rates, could also suspend the railroad. It was favored by progressive Republicans, but not enough to bring a lot of support back to Taft. Progressive Republicans attack plan of commerce to hear ICC appeals. Most judges were conservative, and so there's just a lot of rift happening between them. There's more on Ballinger and Pinchot. The 16th Amendment was created to create an income tax. U.S. government can collect income taxes originally proposed by the populace. It was a graduated income tax, so based on your income was how much tax you would pay. 1912 election. Taft is renominated by the Republicans, now pretty much the conservative Republicans. Roosevelt comes back, chooses to run under the Bull Moose, which is pretty much the progressive Republicans, and because they're so split Woodrow Wilson, who had been former president of Princeton, governor of New Jersey. He's progressive, intellectual, a very good speaker, had very few political debts, had new ideas, comes in and sweeps the election.